Great. Hello, everyone. I made it. It was crazy. Yeah, thank you. I would like to thank Etienne, the team, for coordinating me to get here. It was mostly we were scrambling. My flight yesterday got canceled, and the flight today got delayed by 5 hours, which destroyed my 3-hour buffer of getting here. And yeah, I got 1 hour just before this talk. So I would like to thank the team for having the patience, and is he coming, is he not coming? And yeah, it was a stressful day, and hopefully we can end it here. So this talk is a little bit interesting to me because I wasn't sure what I was gonna say, because today the way we write components, forms have changed differently, right? With AI, of course, right? And I don't want to come here and talk about AI because there is enough people talking about AI, right? So I want to instead talk about some patterns that I have applied to a library that I maintain right now. And I think there is some value there because I think there is a lot of gaps in the ecosystem still today, even with people just, instead of using a library, they have an AI write the entire library for them, right? So let's see if I can convince you of maybe these patterns can be useful to you. So I'm going to focus on forms specifically, but I think the same thing, the same takeaways can be applied to any kind of components. So the problem with form libraries, validation libraries, like I wrote one, and I think they have some issues. They become so complicated, it feels like they are state machines. How many of you used XState to make a form? Yeah. Forms are pretty complicated, but state machines takes it to another level. Maybe it's the right abstraction, maybe not. But it depends on your needs, right? So for me, I like to keep forms simple as much as possible. And then comes a topic that's really everybody forgets about, or it's just always an afterthought, right? Accessibility. In my professional career, I apply accessibility after I have finished the whole thing because nobody cares about it at the beginning, unfortunately. You want to ship, right? You want to ship your UI, you want to be done, you want to have the feature right in front of you. So always, accessibility always it's the first thing that gets ignored, right? And then you have stuff like conditional fields. Now, I don't know about you, but if you have been always a consumer of components, you probably didn't see this much. But if you have played around with a declarative system that tries to guess what happened to a conditional field, because fields just appear and disappear randomly, right? Maybe it's vif'd, maybe it's vfor'd, maybe it's in a loop, maybe something else controls its display. And from a component perspective, you don't really know what happened. All you know, the component got unmounted, and that's it, right? So this has been an incredibly pain point for me, especially when working on vValidate, because I have to guess what the user just did. A component disappeared, an input disappeared. What now? Did they remove it? Did they move it? Did they, right? So many issues can happen here. And then if you have written, how many of you did RTL? Right to left languages? None? Oh, one. Yeah, it's an interesting experience. So me, as someone who wrote websites in Arabic, I always had to write in Arabic, English, and then you deal with the inevitable issue with things have to flip around. And that's not, you can't just do it with CSS. Some people would say just flip everything the other way and it would work. No, it doesn't. Like if you use absolute positioning, it breaks. If you use even some things like keyboard shortcuts, like what's your right arrow is our left arrow, right? And even native HTML is broken. If you use the range element, if you are in RTL and click right, which should increase, it will decrease. So it's actually broken in the native HTML. And nobody cares because, again, like even us who write in RTL don't care much because like it is what it is, right? And people have to deal with it most of the time. So that's why I call it the trenches, because you can't get out of. There is infinite amount of things that just can happen. And yes, there are ways to deal with it. It just, it's a losing battle, in my opinion. Which is why, and later in my career, I stopped doing RTL. Like, our users can read English, it's fine. Just keep it this way. Now, we have a bunch of components. Libraries call themselves headless. Now, for me, whenever I look at a library that calls itself headless, I still see a head. I still see some HTML. I still see some CSS. I still see some things that I have to override every time. So that feels like still a head, right? So I think I described it once as it's like they are calling themselves headless, but it's more like a haircut. You can just change the haircut, but it's still the same head. So what I wanted to do is just take a look at the all form libraries. And again, you can apply this to the broader kind of component libraries. So you can see, like, I have this comparison here that illustrates what's happening. So you have Vue Validate, which is a pure validation library, just validation, nothing else, no fields, no nothing, right? So that sits at the bottom of the spectrum. There are even lower level libraries, like if you use a schema library, Zod or whatever, that's even lower in the spectrum, but I'm trying to use libraries that are actually help us ship things. If you're gonna do everything in Zod, it's gonna work, but it's gonna take a long time until you get to a fully validated form, right? To display its errors and so on. And then you have vValidate. It sits kind of in the middle, but I would say it's still low level because it has no UI, right? But it's kind of hateful because it forces you to do things in a certain way. Even if it's a headless library, it doesn't have any HTML, and still it forces you to write things in a certain way, which is not something I always wanted it to be, but yeah, that's what just happens when you write a library. You just follow your users, see what they want, and you end up with an API that you are not always satisfied of. And then you have stuff like FormKit. I think the logo is dark mode, that's why it doesn't show up correctly. So anyways, FormKit is like a UI library, infinitely customizable, sure. You can create your own input, sure. But at the same time, I feel like it's pretty much hateful. It has a head that you need to override. And in my opinion, overriding and customizing is not the same thing as having control. You are allowed control through what is given to you, right? Not necessarily what you need. So, and this basically applies to all the UI libraries, and each one of them leaves something behind. So validation libraries just do validation, right? But you own the markup, you own the accessibility, you own the internationalization, right? All of that is still your responsibility, which is pretty good, but at the same time not that productive, right? And then you have UI libraries. They are pretty out of the box. Behavior is locked. If you use them the way that they are intended to use, it will work great. You will ship things really quickly. There is a lot of libraries in the Vue ecosystem that are just great at this, and they give you enough customization to fit most needs, right? I've used many of them, and I will definitely default to using one, unless I know for a fact that I don't need to. But then you are fighting the library most of the time, because if you need to override something that doesn't let you override, you fight it. You start fighting it, you start fighting the CSS, you start fighting, which is the easiest. Like, I know, like, how many of you overrode like bootstrap components back in the day or stuff like that? It was insane. Like, you have to fight the specificity, right? And same thing with the current libraries, but today, with the whole component architecture, you are not just only fighting CSS. You can be fighting HTML, because you want to get this arrow drop down into somewhere specific, but you can't because it doesn't let you, or it doesn't expose the right slot at the right place for you. And then you have something like, so that's where you fight the HTML, right? And then sometimes you need to fight the JavaScript, and this is pretty much impossible. So, and then we have stuff like schema builders. So people thought, you know what, let's just make JSON libraries that read some JSON, renders forms. That works great if you have like a CRUD application or stuff like that. But then if you have built one from the scratch, you always know that there has to be some sacrifices, because what if you want to put two inputs together at the same row, right? Then you have to handle layouts. And then it just crumbles from there. And then the whole headless thing. We have slots, we have render props, we have assumptions made by the library authors. Sometimes they are very good assumptions, sometimes they are not. And yeah, these assumptions leak into your application. You carry that burden of overriding, you carry that burden of having to change things to work for you in a certain way. So still has a head, like I say. So I had an idea about 2 years ago where I thought, can I make something that's like works in an API like this? So you call a function, a composable, use field, and it carries all these pain points for you. So it handles state, which is validation, and like the field value itself and whatnot, right? And then it carries the behavior, how should it behave, right? And then it applies that to all of the concerns. So if you are dealing with internationalization, and by internationalization, I just don't mean translating strings, right? We have numeric systems. So there is Arabic numbers, there is Chinese numbers, there are users all over the world, right? And true internationalization caters to each one of them on a fundamental level rather than just translating stuff. So this applies to behavior. So like I said, the arrow key, right arrow key should increase in RTL, right? Should increase a value, but it actually decreases because it's broken. However, a library that takes this into account should handle that. It should know, wait, we are in RTL right now, so the increment is different, and so on. And it applies to also other kind of things, like if you have a radio group, right, you can move through them with the arrow keys, right? However, if they are, the library should know that if they are laid out horizontally or if they are laid out vertically, right? Because this changes how the arrow keys work. And then you have, of course, accessibility. Some error popped up, someone needs to be aware of. Some people need these accessibility features in order to use your app. And all of these, and this can't be just sprayed after the fact, right? And especially if you use a UI library that doesn't do it or does it poorly, you can do it. It's over. So what I thought would be the most right abstraction here for you to own is the template itself. You own the HTML, you have to own the HTML because this controls everything. Owning the HTML means you control the CSS, and controlling the CSS means you control the accessibility as well through the HTML, right? Because you can apply ARIA attributes, you can fix your own stuff because you have access to the elements. They are your elements. There is no weird elements in there. And the API would work in a way that it tells you, okay, I have a few props for this use case, a few props for that use case, and you just spread them however you want to. Like, these are the error props, they should be popped in the error element. I don't know what it is, I don't care what it is. You just spray it in there, and it should work. So this model, I think, worked pretty good. So it works like this. So instead of having a library that looks like this, where you have a slot that passes you a few props and you pass the props into the element, you just call a composable, pass it some props, and you get the input props. And the difference between the two here is you are not even limited by the small boilerplate by the headless component here, right? It's just a composable. It lives in your JavaScript. You can do whatever you want with it. You can do whatever you can with JavaScript with it, right? You can add more props to it. You can remove some props from it. You can create computed stuff on it. You can create watchers on it. You can do whatever you want, right? But if it lives in the template, you can't do much, right? You have to create a component that takes the props, and then it reacts to it, and yeah. So it just adds another level. So for stuff like behavior, I thought about, okay, we have a component that's rich with behavior, right? Combo box. So combo box has an input, a search input. It has a drop down, so it reacts to your arrow keys. It reacts to your tabs. It reacts to enter, space. It reacts to, like, list boxes should react to the home button, to the home key, the end key, and page up key, page down key, all the stuff that HTML usually does for you. So we could, in theory, build something like this from smaller composables, right? Because combo box is not a thing on its own. It's just a bunch of things, right? It's an input, so it follows input stuff, input accessibility, input focus, right? And it also like it has a trigger. Sometimes you can have a button that triggers a drop down. Okay, so that can be there, but it also has a list box, and that follows the list box behavior. Also, select elements have list box. So you can see how these inputs start to exhibit some shared level of logic behind them, right? And something like this. So state, it follows the same thing. So for a field, a simple field, right? You have the field value, you have the error, you have whether it's touch, whether it's dirty, whether it's valid, set value, and I think most form libraries does this exact same thing. So we can isolate what the field needs in terms of state into composable. We can isolate what interaction needs in terms of composable, and so on. I think I have examples at some point, but let's take a step back. So from working on forms with Vue.js for a very long time, I always thought forms should be declarative. I don't believe forms should live in your script. I believe they should live in your template because that's how they behave in HTML, right? You declare them and they work. But the problem with this is we are using a framework, and the framework is a UI state framework, which means state-derived UI. So how can you make something declarative derive the state, right? This becomes a challenge. This is the challenge of conditional fields, and so on. So what I did with this library that I built called Formwork, so it implements a system called form transactions, right? So everything becomes like a programming problem, right? So instead of guessing what happened, I can just wait and see what happened, right? So a field disappeared. OK, let's wait a tick, like a view tick, and check it again. Maybe it's still there. Maybe it's a change order or something. And if I can find it, then I know what happened to it. If it disappeared completely, then I know it got unmounted, and then I can destroy its state. So I think this system is so much smaller in terms of code size compared to what vValidate tries to do. So this is in FormKit is like, I think, a single file that tracks all of these changes, and it does it in a very simple way, and it just works. Like, no matter what you do with it, just throw v-fors, v-ifs. It doesn't even track the fields. Like, I don't have a registry of what the fields that are currently displayed right now. I don't track that. I don't care. I just react to changes, which I call a transaction here. A field got removed. A field got added. A field got initialized. An array field had a mutation. So stuff like this. So if I break things down like this, it becomes way easier to predict what happened and react to it properly. Now, let's talk about the markup. So this is a simple anatomy for one of the components that Formwork handles. So it's like a select field, and there is no wrapper elements. It's basically all we care about from a Formwork perspective is you have these specific elements, right? You should have a label, right? There should be a label in any input, right? There should be a trigger button for the select. Some users need to click something for the drop-down to appear. And then maybe there is a search query, something people can use to search with. Maybe there is a description or error text. And all of these maybes, it's up to you. Like, you grab the prop, throw it on the element, and we have, like, I built a system that captures the element, so it kind of sees what element you are using, and then it reacts to that. So this system allows you to do things in any way you want. Maybe you want to remove the label completely, right? So what happens? What happens then is the library detects that there is no label element. In this case, it applies an ARIA label attribute on the element. So it keeps it accessible through what it can do based on what you do, right? And I think this is the right model of thinking about composable fields in the UI or composable behaviors in the UI. It should react to what you are doing. It shouldn't always be something that has to be done the same way over and over. Yeah, there are some demos. So there is one of them. So this is a input field, right? And it should, so input fields are really interesting because here's a pain point for me as someone who writes in Arabic. Sometimes I have my keyboard switched to Arabic, and I go to an input field and start typing these Arabic letters, and the whole website blows up because it can't parse them, right? Because the developer thought there is no way someone writes numbers that are not numbers that HTML inputs will allow. And yeah, HTML inputs will allow the Arabic numbers, and You won't be able to parse them. So that breaks. And something I wanted to always do is derive the intention of the user, right? So if the user starts typing in Arabic, I kind of can detect that because there are only specific range of letters, right? So I can simple regex. You can check and see, oh, they are writing in Arabic, so I should start parsing Arabic, right? And this is what happens in the library. So the library, when you submit, it actually gives you the parsed value. It doesn't give you whatever the user wrote, because the user can write something like this, and then, yeah, I don't even know what's in there. But these are valid. Some users will type that, some users will use that, and if you have an input that reacts this way, that's friendly to the user, like just type a number, man, and I'll take care of it, right? And if that's the case, then you just made your components way more open to more audiences, right? Your website is now more friendly to more audiences. And let's talk about accessibility. So the ARIA attributes are, again, like I said before, it's wired to the attributes that you spread on the element. So let's, something like input props that you can get from use field usually have something like this. So it knows first what kind of input you are using, so it applies a rule. And it knows if it's required or not based on the validation rules. And it also knows if it's invalid or not based on its current state. And it applies all these ARIA attributes for you, so you don't have to. And so it becomes a first, like I would say, first-party concern. It's not something that's forgotten about. It's baked in from the start in the library. And all of this is possible because it's composable. And this is what I wanted to show you. So something like use number field in framework actually looks like this under the hood. So it has a spin button. What's a spin button? It's the arrow increment decrement stuff. So that's a behavior that probably exists in other components. So let's compose that. We have a number parser that exists also in a lot of components that may have numbers, right? So let's compose that into its own thing. The input validity, which handles the HTML validation for it, that can be composed as its own thing. The model proxy, which just emits vModel events, I think that's less relevant to the talk, but again, it's something that can be used in all the inputs and all the fields. And then you have something like use locale, which detects the locale that you are using, it detects the user locale that they are trying to type in, and it reacts to that, right? So that feeds to the number parser, and the number parser feeds to everything else, and they all compose nicely because they are all built from the bottom up in that way. And at the end, use number field gives you the prop bundles. Number field, just apply it on whatever you consider a number field, right? And it works. And so all of this is hidden to you. But at the same time, if you are building something completely new and never seen input field from scratch, right? Maybe you'll need some of these, right? I can see you using use locale in almost all of them, right? So stuff like that. So another field, like use date field. So it's a way more complex component, but it's actually using the same stuff. So it has a date time segment group, which uses the number parser. So that represents the single date parts, like days, month, years, minutes, and all of these need a number parser, right? Because user can still write them in any numbering language or any numbering system, right? So they can write dates in Arabic, and you will get the bar state. And this is exactly what we want to have as an experience. So yes, there are more pieces, but you get to control what the output experience of this by applying the composable at the right places that you want to. So breaking things down to a lot of composables. And I know we are I think we have had a wave in the Vue.js community where we talked about composables non-stop, and everyone, I hope, is using composables today. But I think we haven't talked about them much in terms of using them in the UI, right? We have been using them for state, we have been using them for programmatic stuff, right? Not UI declarative stuff. So that's what I wanted to show you here is we actually can. So a slider uses a spin button. But you can say a slider doesn't have an up and arrow buttons, right? But it reacts to these keys on the keyboard. So it doesn't have the elements, but it has the behavior, which is the listeners, all that stuff. So use slider in framework just does that. It actually doesn't hook up anything to the up and down elements, and it just listens and just has everything else. So max value, minimum value, everything else that a use button might have. And then you have use locale as usual and the other stuff as well. So I think you are getting the point that now that in order for me to create a new component like use slider, all I needed to do was create use slider thumb. And the rest is what I already did, right? I already did the locale, I already did the spin button, I already did the input validate. And I think AI really works well with this because if it understands what pieces you already have, it can easily put them together, right? So like a slider thumb just handles the position of an element on a slide. That's it. It's a UI simple thing. It has a few computed styles. It reacts to mouse downs, mouse ups, so mouse moves. So it's a pretty simple system that any AI or you can write. So this is a live example of this. So what I want to show you is there is two fields right here. So you would create a component called text field or whatever, and you would use something called use text field from framework. And that's your text component. That's it. You're done. Now, if you want to add more stuff to it, you can. If you want to add list of it, you can as well. So both fields have the same behaviors, and it's declarative. It follows the HTML validation, actually. So you don't have to redeclare everything again. Like I always hated that you have to say like you have a schema, so you say the field is required and the field is an email, but then you go to the HTML and you say the field is required and it's also an email. And then you turn off the HTML validation because you don't want that weird pop-up to show up, right, to your users. So framework kind of lets you lean on that. You can lean to the HTML validation, and we will silence the weird stuff for you. And at the same time, we will also consolidate its state with the schema that you use, like Zod or whatever. I know I didn't show framework here a lot, but you can, it's framework.dev, you can see it. But let's talk about something even more complex. So that's a date picker component. And I think this is one of the components that people who like to build stuff, they stop here and say, no, I'm not building that. Because how many days should be there, right? Where does the month end? Where does the month start, right? And I think all starts at 1. But anyway, so where does the month end, right? And then, is it a leap year? Should there be 29th February? Maybe there shouldn't be. So you run into all of this stuff. And then someone who's maybe in the Middle East comes to you and tells you, hey, we are using a different date system, and whatever you have doesn't work for us. And it doesn't even follow the same thing, because it follows the moon, so it's completely random, and it's not reliable. And yeah, it becomes very difficult to deal with all of that. But HTML already has the working parts for this. It has a date formatter that can handle these stuff. So it just, we weren't using them. And so a component like this can do something like, yeah, I know. How many of you can read this, actually? So not, but you can trust me. It says Saturday because it starts on Saturday for us, Sunday, Monday, whatever, right? And it knows all that stuff because it knows where your day fields are, where your date cells is, and it knows what year it should be because it converts them through the system. So if the user picks 2027, for example, 1st of January 2027, you can reverse that into what Hijri date it was. And you think that's a bit not useful to you, right? But for many users, that's an official date system, and they wouldn't use your components if it doesn't have it. So just think about that, how many parts of the world that you are alienating by having stuff like that. So we can switch to other date systems. There is Coptic date systems. We use them sometimes in Egypt, not so much anywhere else, I think. But they are really weird, and yeah, but they are very similar to the normal calendar. So, but again, just having a system that is able to handle that means you don't have to worry about that as a developer, right? You just build components, and you know it's going to work. You don't have to worry about that. And yeah, we can walk into weird territories. So what about drop zones, right? I don't have enough time to show you how it works, but it works, right? So you can handle, and all of this is actually on you. So if I show you the props that you are actually using, so you have input props, you have a drop zone props. So how does it know if it's a drop zone or not? It knows if you are using the drop zone props or not. So if you are not using it, it's not a drop zone. So it doesn't listen to drops, it doesn't handle all of that, and it just, okay, it's a normal click to upload thing, right? It gives you the entries, so you can render your preview fields if you want to. So it pretty much gives you all the way, everything you can or need to actually render these things. And let me move on quickly. So the same thing, we applied the exact same principles, the exact same idea to all of these fields. So right now, today, you can use any of these fields, which I think it's a pretty good collection of fields, but they all have the exact same capabilities that you have seen here today. So locales, the arrow keys handling, navigation, and stuff like that. Accessibility, and all of that. So you can check out framework.dev. Again, I'm not here to tell you to use the library, but I'm telling you that you can build a system like this. And this was mostly an experiment, and I think it found a great success for me because a lot of users are using framework, and in production today, it's not 1.0 yet, but they are using it today, and they are finding great success with it because of all of these things. So this, to me, this experiment proved that UI can also be composable, not just the stuff that we used to have as composables. So thank you. If you want to follow me, if you want to talk to me after this, these are my socials, and I will share the slides later on my Twitter. But yeah, I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you very much.